All right, Prudentialist, welcome back to the channel. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for having me on this impromptu stream discussion. I have no idea what we're talking about. The thumbnail was very misdirecting.
Honestly, anytime I have a non-numbered episode, I just kind of give myself license to make the most shameful thumbnails possible. And with each time, I try to kind of make it worse and worse. And I think I made a good effort this time. The once you kind of figure out how to do YouTube clickbait, it's kind of fun. And I would feel genuinely guilty if I did it more than like once or twice a year. But every once in a while, just as a treat, I think it's okay.
As a treat. That's what matters. As a treat.
Yeah, as a treat. So yeah, honestly, like you said, this was sort of impromptu. I had some free time, and you normally would be doing content or the Archipelago show that you do with Geo, but he's unfortunately under the weather, so that was canceled. And so I figured, it would be a decent time to just have kind of a casual talk. And the thing I kind of wanted to address, because it's been kind of the most interesting story, is the breakdown of should we say just like the Zionist collective in American conservatism. So just curious, from your perspective, like what do you see going on there?
Oh man, what a loaded question for observations. I for starters, I think that we are at some kind of rhetorical inflection point, and I think that when we saw this ongoing conflict between Hamas and the Israelis happen, which we saw all of a sudden all of the progressive protests on college campuses, chanting, from what is it, from like the river to the sea or whatever, Israel be free. I don't know the whole thing. And a lot of people, you got John Podhoretz to come back on Twitter after the 2020 election. He left in 2019, and it took a war in Israel to get one of the best well-known neocons and speechwriters for neocons back on Twitter. But it's been interesting to witness what feels like his father, Norman Podhoretz, who famously wrote in, I think, Commentary magazine in 1963, an essay famously titled "My Negro Problem in Ours." And this essay was sort of just detailing the tenuous and the strained relationship between blacks and Jews and how to deal with the civil rights movement. And it's an interesting essay. It also illustrates some very strange sexual insecurity from Mr. Podhoretz, who later became like a well-known Trump guy. But neither here nor there. And so my initial gut check reaction is like, oh man, I really don't want neoconservatism 2.0 to happen, because that tended to be the case with the first wave of neoconservatism. Is that a predominantly Jewish group of individuals that are supportive of a foreign policy more oriented towards Israel and are a little more socially conservative under this like blanket statement of what's Western values. And if you go to someone like Max Boot, right, he wrote an op-ed in 2003, what is a neocon, and it's primarily a foreign policy based position oriented mainly around the existence and continued defense of the state of Israel. Now, to see all this play out as it is, yesterday was a big, interesting day for those in the not happening gang on Twitter, I suppose, because Elon Musk replied to some gentleman who's now privated his account, saying like, look, it's hard for me to be sympathetic towards Western diaspora Jews when, the same dialectical arguments that you want me to support, you guys have been using against white people for forever. You have, of course, the whole Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro thing, which, of course, Ben Shapiro is not in charge of the Daily Wire, but he's got significant pull. And then Tucker Carlson having Candace Owens on saying, hey, where were you guys 10 years ago when they were funding the words white genocide? So it's been an interesting rhetorical game. I do have to preface all this by saying that I know Twitter isn't real life and that the internet isn't real life. But I do think in the midst of the desires to, say, ban the ADL, which, of course, that hasn't happened from Twitter, I don't think it ever was going to, but you have this strange position where, for the first time in my lifetime, and I'm not an old man by any stretch of the imagination, but for nearly 28 years on this earth, this is the first time I'm seeing things kind of like be openly questioned about support for Israel or how to handle things, and to watch the ordeal of civility play out in real time. because, you go back to 2014 or 2006 or any of the other, intifadadas or whatever, there was unabashed American support for it. And there was this desire to, stand by them, right, for whatever variety of reasons. And then you throw in now, and of course, this has a lot to do with demographics. There's a great tweet by Helen Andrews that says, I'm going to keep saying it till I'm blue in the face. It's not ideology, it's demographics. That, you look at the younger generations that have no historical memory of, say, what happened in World War II and the alleged crimes therein, or the the support for the Israeli state or its existence. And you notice that precipitously the decline amongst the generations has decreased. And a lot of that, I think, is a good indication for demographics as well, is that, a new population that isn't Western or white, that has little to no, ties to, say, these collective guilt trips and blood libels, it's a little easier to view this in a very strict lens of oppressor oppressed dynamics. And that's a very important thing to understand, is that, you can play Schrodinger's minority all that you want. You can say that you're white one day and then say that you're Jewish the other. For most progressives, including white liberal progressives, they do not view this as a Jewish issue. This is viewed primarily as a settler colonialist issue, and that this is white colonialism. And you saw this in the Cenotaph protests on Armistice Day or Veterans Day over in Britain, where, they said that you could be on the white side of history, and it showed Britain, France, Israel, and the United States, their flags, or the right side of history, and it showed all these, like, Middle Eastern brown people nations that, stone homosexuals and are anti-women's rights. But hey, that's the right side of history, apparently. Kind of funny in the backdrop that there was a TikTok trend going around of people reading and reacting to Osama bin Laden's open letter to America. Got the Guardian to take the open letter down after being up there for like 20 some odd years. So it's been an interesting day for dialectics, and an interesting day for discussion over a variety of issues respectful to Zionism or Jewish identity in the West. But I guess only time will tell of how much of this will play out into anything tangible, because I'm more pessimistic, I suppose, because I want to be hopeful that, hey, maybe something changes, but I don't know. I've been burned before. I remember 2020.
I also remember 2020, and would just like to announce that whatever happened, I loved it and I believe in it, I think. So I think in the bigger picture, what's been kind of fascinating to me in this is the war for kind of like the outer shell of the cathedral, right? The kind of like house opposition party that is the RNC. Because there was kind of a debate for a while, which is Trump an aberration or the new course, right? Is Trump kind of a momentary blip on the radar of the Republican Party? And then do we go back to, David Brooks? Do we go back to, essentially what the conservative movement was when you and I were young, right? And it seems to me that, at least, at kind of like current, as of, how things stand right now, that is essentially a dead force, right? You see many of the figures involved in that, David French, have essentially just become out and out Democrats, right? And it seems like essentially there's been some kind of clearing house, and the figures that were kind of riding the line, like Shapiro, like some of these other more Israel focused, have essentially been taking major heat from the kind of like the current, I guess, like ascendant camp in the Republican Party. Now, I'm going to qualify all of this by saying, like, I've very rarely vote. I'm not really into party politics per se, but it is nonetheless interesting, right? Because that group, like Shapiro, like a lot of the, the kind of older Daily Wire hosts, like, Glenn Beck, that essentially was one of the dominant forces in, American politics. And now we have, a Republican base that is, if not completely anti, the war in Ukraine, shall we say, leaning that way, right? Which is a sharp departure from how things were, when I was a kid, to now being and obviously there's still a bunch of, cringe boomers, Lion of Judah posting and all that.
I would argue that that's still the majority.
Well, and I agree with you, right? Like by the numbers, and partially it's just because there are very few, young conservatives. But I think that the problem is that it does sort of seem like that line of argumentation has run its course, and under a certain age, no one cares. And so I'm not saying this triumphantly, like, we're 3 years away from based world. Far from it. But it is at least interesting in the sense that like the pre-2016 frame, it seems like, has fully gone away. Like I don't think we're going back to that.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to I think we're going to be forever I don't think we're ever going to go back to the pre-2016 paradigm, because the aberration that was the election of Donald John Trump is permanently seared into every politician in this current subset of people, and for everyone that comes after Trump. There will be a generation of people chasing after the spirit of 2016. And there will be a generation of people that will look at Donald Trump as a case study for why we can never let aberrant, demagogic like characters rise to any level of affluence and potentially tank the country. Because Donald Trump, by all intents and purposes, is a 90s shit lib. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of, how crazy the left is today in 2023. But imagine if you got someone like Fasci in, right? These are the doomsday scenarios liberals plot up, and they wrote all these books about Trump and could it happen here? Could we get an American painter in the office instead of an Austrian one? And so I think that we're living now in a world where disintermediation of the media, like we're no longer reliant on Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, Tom Brokaw, or Anderson Cooper or whatever. So anyone can be a leader, quote unquote, if you manage to gain a significant enough audience. And in doing so, you can generate an effective change of pace for where the direction of the country or the ideas are going. So to see Candace Owens, for example, who I can't say I'm a fan of, I don't follow her, I don't watch her show, yada yada. But like, to simply see her feud with the kvetching Ben Shapiro on the timeline is entertaining. And a lot of people are like, listen, we understand, Ben, your people are under attack, but I guess don't act like a shrill woman so much. I guess there's a mixture of tone policing, but also that you're asking me to come on board for a game of extermination, which let's be honest, this is what the conflict is in Hamas versus the Israeli state and whatnot, is that for those that wish to settle and be in that area, that usually means wiping them out. And so we're just like witnessing which side in a race war for extermination do we want to participate in. And I get it. Shapiro's got his side, obviously, but everyone's kind of like, I'm not really Jewish. I'm not really an Israeli. I think I've got bigger problems at home. You have a good military. Good luck. And America's going to give them aid anyway. So it's just a strange time to be around.
Well, and I think that one of the more kind of big picture trends in this is the extent to which the Republican Party has essentially become a party for white people. In the sense, right, that this information goes around, right? Like if you take the demographics of the country as it were, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and have it run through, different hypothetical elections, you'll see that essentially the whole country minus like, Massachusetts, Wisconsin goes red. And I'm not saying this in a triumphant sense, but it seems like there's sort of this sort of pressure on one end, right? And we hear this a lot with, why the kind of gap between young men and young women on how they describe themselves, that essentially for certain segments of the population becomes more and more difficult to see yourself as a part of the rainbow coalition, right? David asking this question of like, okay, like what does a straight white male progressive look like? That's pretty difficult to say. And I think that
that's my favorite question to ask people.
Right. But I think that the kind of grifter, what would have been called like the alt-light sphere, people like Posobiec, kind of that tier has started to pick up on a lot of more pro-white rhetoric, in addition to people like, Matt Walsh. And so I'm not by any means, a white nationalist. That's not kind of where I come from. But the degree to which those sort of talking points have kind of entered the political landscape is very, very interesting. And look, obviously, I have no faith in any of our elected officials to capitalize on that. But it does seem like that kind of increased polarization is ramping up, regardless of how you feel, if it's I don't know, a good thing or not. And in addition to that, I think that one of the things that I guess I've been watching is the degree to which there is no, I guess, possible synthesis in all of this. That essentially the debate between Academic Agent and Arne McIntyre, both friends of ours, is can the regime pull off, the dialectical synthesis? Can they basically say, all right, like we've had MAGA, we have progressivism, but we need to have a society. Can we fold everyone back together? And that debate between the two of them is AA basically thinks that they can do it, thinks that they can kind of put it back in their pants and kind of calm down again. And on the other side, right, you have the position, and to be honest, if you would have asked me, I mean, even this summer, I would have gone with AA on it, but it sort of seems like this issue, Israel-Palestine is it's the crack in the Liberty Bell, right? It's the thing that makes it impossible for that synthesis to form, because as I talked to Philo with last night, it's sort of an uncomfortable point, right? At which, a lot of the donor class of Team Blue is seen as an oppressor class by, kind of like the foot soldiers of Team Blue. And obviously, we're all elite theory pilled here. We all understand that, the disorganized minority doesn't matter. But the problem is with systems like affirmative action, with bringing more traditionally disadvantaged people into roles of power, is that like, okay, they maybe weren't the best choice for that, but they still have the office. They control a certain amount of power. And I think what we're seeing with, recently Bloomberg came out with this article that said, the vast majority of jobs created since COVID have gone to minority groups by, leaps and bounds. And essentially that creates this kind of, runaway system where, parts of this coalition have basically said, well, we don't need you anymore. And I don't know. As someone who is, shall we say, bearish, on the, I guess like the American project, it's an interesting thing to watch. And I don't know. Like I said, I realize I don't have some kind of crystal ball to ponder, to gaze into, to kind of, say like, this is what's going to happen. But I think that as we watch the kind of, fraying of the social fabric of America, that kind of energy that was created from disillusion of traditional social bonds start to ebb, the entropy takes over the system. I think that these things will kind of continue. And obviously, there's kind of a right-wing crime circuit that goes around where kind of, we get very upset about certain things that happen, people stealing from stores. But what's been interesting in that, and I promise I'll throw this back to you, Prude, is that the kind of crimes we're seeing are starting to become more and more third world, right? There's videos constantly of, Amazon trucks, UPS trucks just getting robbed in traffic, which is something that didn't happen long ago. And so I guess the big picture in all of this is that the rate of decay seems to be increasing. So sorry, Prude, I know you're back. Did you catch any of that?
Some of it, yeah. I do think that we're witnessing that. I think that third world, ism or worldization is definitely happening. One is a mix of, I think what, like you had mentioned, demographics, and also just like the blatant anarcho tyranny of the left, which of course is meant to make sure that, white people don't feel safe in cities or in neighborhoods or anything. Because, to witness Los Angeles, have their rail cars that have Amazon packages get raided like instantly, like just ravaging hordes of people, like opening them up. We've witnessed in Philadelphia and other places, people will just stick up Amazon delivery drivers and they'll just rob the back regardless of what's in them. And then all of a sudden you learn that, hey, Xi Jinping is coming over, and Gavin Newsom's like, yeah, we're just going to clear them all out. Fuck these people. It's just like, oh my gosh. And you start asking, even the normies are asking those questions like, wait, you could do those things? You could just clear out the homeless and parade them? And meanwhile, in some bizarro world, I suppose, Gavin Newsom would just say Giga Chad, yes, because I can. And I'm doing it because someone important is coming over. But it does illustrate, I think, in the laundry list of these discourses and these dialectical engagements between the left, the right, and just in general, is that, it does illustrate, I think, how much people have sort of given up on hope of the current situation at home, that, we can have nationalism by proxy, as long as we can own the international rootless cosmopolitan cabal. I'm trying to play really nice here with my words. As long as we can, own those guys, we'll side with anybody. And I feel like this is the same issue that you see with like conservatives and TERFs. Like, no, like TERFs are just progressives that stopped bowing down to the idols of trannies. And the same way that when you see Dave Rubin be like, oh, well, the left left me. No, you're just a homosexual, Jewish man who passes as white that didn't want to bow down to the latest progressive shibboleth because you knew it was going to come for you. And we see that, quite presently all about and around. And you notice this because unlike Chaston and Pete Buttigieg, what does, someone like Dave Rubin do to announce that he's trafficking a human child? Oh, he shows the sonogram because that's more humane or pro-life in the appearance of things. So that's how you get Con Inc. on board with it. But I'm rambling, Jay. I'm rambling, but
Oh, not at all.
It happens.
Well, I think that, I don't know, that the kind of through line through all of this, right, is that, and I realize, we all have certain opinions on Mr. Agent, but in reading his book, talking about kind of the cycles of empires, there is that sort of feeling that, once an idea becomes kind of ridiculous on its face, once it becomes impossible for people to feel like they can genuinely believe in it, it does fall apart, because you need kind of like genuine, non-ironic belief to kind of motivate anyone to do something dangerous and hard, that kind of will to power. And I think that the good part of that is that, as much as there is an evil part of our empire, as much as there is a set of ideas that have led to untold violence, right? I'm talking about like the Madeleine Albright types. That seems to be impossible now. This kind of like long-term trend of, bad recruiting, of kind of it becoming more and more difficult to motivate people to live and die for this thing is, that's good from a certain perspective. But on the other end, right, you see this sort of inability to solve our own problems, right? It's sort of, drowning in the bathtub, where it's like, if you could just stand up, right? If you could just have Xi Jinping go to every city in America, they'd magically be clean again. And so I think that sort of, I guess, kind of like creeping malaise, and I enjoyed your solo stream. It was yesterday, the day before that, about, idolatry, where you sort of mentioned that is something that is, on one hand, it's sad, right? Because the sort of trappings that, shall we say, the previous conservative movement draped itself in, and it was sort of memed to death by things like, Team America, and, kind of like all of the kind of the dunking on, they hate us for our freedom, the kind of like George Bush, like weird pseudo Zionist nationalism stuff. But at the same time, right, those are symbols that in an ordinary time, you and I would rightly feel affection for, the symbol of our country, the symbol of all of this. And so on one hand, right, there's this kind of sadness in seeing those things go away. But at the same time, I think we have to kind of frankly realize that, like, maybe our empire wasn't such a good thing, that at least at this point in time, it had become a force for global evil. And, I think that even if it's not so explicitly stated, I think that a lot of the kind of forces in the conservative movement are recognizing that, recognizing that, wait a minute, like, this isn't in our best interest. And I'm not, again, I don't think that that's necessarily going to save us, but it is interesting to see that realization kind of spread, I guess.
Yeah, no, because there was this question that was posed, or maybe I think it was an article from The Hill, some op-ed, and it was kind of funny. I only tapped in on this because I was purview to some insider baseball from our friend Orrin McIntyre about business, but it was about the Constitution, and it was like, can the Constitution work with today's 2023 America? And the obvious answer to that question is no, because the Constitution isn't really followed. The basic separation of powers, maybe, but the explicit enumerated powers, the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court, or what Congress can and can't do, is obviously very much abdicated in responsibility because we're not the same people of the founding of this country. But at the same time, 10 years ago in 2013, I would have been, in my own youthful, idealistic sort of, late senior year of high school, teenage year sort of stuff. It was just like, no, the Constitution is this very reverent thing that I believe in because my country has a rich and valid and good history. And it has been a force, maybe not for good, obviously, but, it's still a nation that has the capability to be good. And I think that was sort of the sort of American patriotism that maybe is old stock progressivism, but it's just that, there's really good people here. And I know that they can't all be awful, you know? And then you look at 2023 America and you're just like, well, the Constitution's a dead letter anyway. What's the point? And it's sort of that acknowledgement that your old religion may have been a falsehood or a falsity, or that its idols have fallen prostrate before something new. I mean, Robert E. Lee has been taken down. And then if you go to somewhere like the city of New Orleans, the mayor's mansion has a giant Afro hair pick statue right outside of it. And the ultimate form of uh, idolatry towards a racial identity. And I'm trying really hard not to use a word I like using about that stuff. But it's indicative to me that you and I, despite our very different upbringings, I think we both have that sort of old style love for the country that, we're trying to reconcile with the fact that the people who run this damn thing are evil. Like there was this tweet, and I wish I remember who said it, but it was this point about American imperialism, where it was just like, you don't hate imperialism. You hate the fact that your empire's being ran like a garbage truck, and it's like really shitty and it smells bad and it does a job, but you don't like the job that it does because it's ugly. And he's like, I think you'd be more pro, American imperialism if like Saudi Arabia was like a protectorate of America and you got like a dividend check every month from like US Standard Oil. He's like, that'd be different. And I'm like, yeah, it would be. I'd probably be a much more like, old Whig style imperialist if we were doing that shit, but we don't. Instead, we're using, luxury gay space dildo feminism in order to tell people that if you allow women to vote and gays can, adopt children, then somehow you too can be a democracy and get access to money. And at the end of the day, I just realized that, no man can serve two masters. And so what is the U.S. foreign policy with its dollars and foreign aid? Yeah, U.S. foreign policy is mammon. And that's really where we're at right now and have been for quite some time.
Well, and I think that is because I was talking to John Slaughter about this quite a lot, off stream, and he's made no bones about the fact that he was a veteran and he served in the War on Terror, and we were talking about the kind of post-war track that a lot of either people who served or were kind of swept up in, like the kind of like the spirit of the age in kind of red American circles. And what he said is, a lot of people realized they were lied to afterwards. but it was way easier to come to one of two rationalizations. Either the kind of like cop out Michael Moore style, oh, they just wanted oil. Or on the other end, the kind of like libertarian cop out that essentially just like, oh, all government's bad. And I think that a lot of people, like you said, are kind of realizing that this thing is evil. And I listen to every once in a while when I'm kind of truly done with right-wing podcasts, I'll kind of go into, more normie tier stuff. And I'm kind of interested in, podcasts where guys kind of tell their war stories, right? So these are, sometimes like Vietnam guys or, even older, because it's just interesting to hear someone kind of frankly tell, their life story. And I was listening to one while I was at the gym, and the host and the guest were both CIA contractors, right? They were glowies. And, they were involved in the war on terror. They did, shall we say, a lot of kind of unethical things under the, kind of like the aegis of defending our country. And most of the conversation is what you'd expect. But there was this moment, and it was kind of this like moment of realization where these two guys, it goes quiet for a little bit. And one of them just looks at the other and goes, man, do you think we're the bad guys? And I think that is a harder realization, right? When you've kind of put something up on the plate, right? Like you have given something of yourself that, even if you didn't know it, you were kind of furthering something wrong. I think that's a very uncomfortable place to be in.
There is an uncomfortable place to be in because it illustrates that if you think that whatever you currently live in right now is evil, one, I think that there is this propensity to make you more likely to side with perhaps more dangerous elements. And I think this is why third worldism or even being a pro-Zionist can sometimes be, it's incredibly dangerous and unhealthy, because if you are projecting and displacing your own in-group preferences and nationalist tendencies to the out-group, then that out-group also has no problem destroying you. I think that you see that quite clearly. But I think the other important thing to consider in all this, and there are a lot of people I know who are younger than me, yourself included, and a few others that are, coming on to the scene. A lot of Zoomers, a lot of young guys, and I like them, and I have a lot of hope for them. And they'll post about Patrick Buchanan and things like that. And it's just like we're the children of a generation and children of ashes where Pat Buchanan had lost or Joe Sobran had lost, and that James Baker and Father Coughlin and all these other guys that were skeptical about the growth of state power and the growth of foreign influence in America, all of a sudden, those guys lost, and we're sort of inheriting their intellectual tradition. The question becomes, well, how can we not lose this time, or how do we, or is it too late? And I don't really entertain that last question so much, but I think it does illustrate that we're in a position where we are trying to find out where we are. And I think that for a lot of white conservative Americans, there's going to be this very strange 40 years in the desert, or perhaps we've been in these 40 years and we're now the second generation of people that have been brought up, and we're kind of waiting for our own version of Joshua to bring the walls of Jericho down. And I don't know who that Joshua figure would be, and I don't know who, we're so disorganized and scattered, and I think that's why for a lot of people the innate desire to be united to something, one, that is divine, but two, to be united to groups and people that relate to their similar struggles. This is why, as I said yesterday on my own live stream, which I would behoove people to listen to, I said there's a big reason why Dave's content, the Distributist, has shifted so much away from essays and live streams, not just because he's like a family man, he's a dad, and he's got a busy job, and he's a professional, but also it's about the basket weaving, because you can only do so much on the internet, but everything can change instantly. You and I have had the pleasure of dining in front of each other and meeting in person, which was a wonderful pleasure. And you want to do more of that, because at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to break bread and to skip all the, like, I guess, oh, I'm a friend of Dorothy, but right wing type deal, about trying to figure out whether or not someone's based or not. And you can just, like, speak in plain English, which is always fantastic. And it helps rejuvenate the political soul as well as your actual soul, because for most of us, I think we do look at the news day in and day out, and I think that you just look at it and you're like, oh man, this all really sucks. Like look at look at my government, bro. It's occupied, sort of stuff, and it can be incredibly deleterious to your own political will or your own thumos to act on things. So I think that is just a big consequence of these third worldisms, these pushes for I must care about a foreign people that isn't my own, whilst watching said foreign people, completely subvert my institutions and bring in more people that hate me and drink a glass of farm fresh milk to cultivate white genocide. It's just like, yeah, I know I'm not alone, but because of the methods of our communication, I do feel incredibly fragmented in the world because of it. And it's good to be in person with like-minded friends.
I think that in all of this, there's sort of a danger in kind of recognizing the fraying social order, right? That essentially, like, it's the it's all over post, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we've both seen people kind of spiral, people who, either, make content, people who don't, kind of basically just like completely lose themselves to kind of despair. But one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about a lot is the patterns, and maybe, again, this is from reading A's book, but kind of the patterns of the Old Testament, right? The of the the original Hebrews, right? Maybe a discussion for another time why I make that distinction, and kind of this continual cycle of, decadence, being given over to your enemies, and then redemption. And obviously, maybe you could say, as some have, well, that is something only extended, to the biblical Hebrews, and maybe that's true. But I do think there is something to that idea that there's kind of a purifying force to oppression in a way, that is a kind of a crucible. And I think that there's this desire to, and both the kind of like weird progressive types and the right kind of engage in this, is that, kind of imagining that there's this group of like, backwoods Ubermensch just around the corner, waiting for some signal to essentially, rise up and become the Freikorps of New America.
That'd be so great, but it's not happening.
Exactly, right? But I do think that and you mentioned that term, "children of the ashes," and I think it's an accurate one. But it's sort of encouraging, that things are getting worse, because at least when I think of like what's truly the most depressing option, it is the idea that this just goes on forever, that we essentially just kind of enter this like kind of like never ending kind of like slide into mediocrity. And, on one hand, it's like, oh dear God, a homeless encampment just caught on fire and melted a highway in, one of the biggest cities in America. That's not good. And on the other hand, it's like, well, they can't have that much control if they're letting things slip like that. I don't know. These are the things that I think about.
Well, it can and will get worse. We talk about a homeless encampment. I'm excited to see what happens when a nuclear power plant breaks down, or a National Guard armory gets raided. Things will get worse before they get worse, and then maybe they get better. Like you're oh ye of little faith, your imagination is far too small to comprehend how bad things could possibly get. And I look forward to my next 3 Mile Island scenario where I may or may not have to flee because of radiation, right? Like, I think about V for Vendetta, and I think about the whole backdrop as America's in a civil war or whatever. But it won't be a civil war in America. It'll just be like America turned into Zimbabwe, and here we are trying to project power on the world stage. But I mean, I think it's also I sometimes I'm afraid where people will ask for a Caesar or they'll ask for a king, and I think again back to the Old Testament, and they're just like, God, please give us a king, please just give us a king, and God's like, are you guys sure about that? This king's going to be an asshole. He's going to tax you. He's going to be cruel and a kind of a tyrant. And the Hebrews are like, yes, 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 Lord, like give us a king. And the king is exactly what God describes it to be. And so like, I just imagine all these discussions about Caesar. It's just like, oh, please, God, give us a Caesar, please, please. And God's just like, okay, but Caesar's going to be like pro-homosexual, pro-trans, but the trains will run on time. And then everyone's going to be like, and by then it's too late. and but I don't know. These are the things that I think about, and these are the things that come up in my brain when it's an impromptu stream of discussion, because anything and everything probably can and will happen. But at the end of the day, the past is up to God's mercy. Tomorrow is up to his providence. Today is what we make of it, and we should be a little more proactive in how we take care of ourselves and our neighbor.
And I think that when I look at people like us who are doing well in the world, obviously.
Speak for yourself.
Well, no. When I look at people who are doing that,
Yeah.
But I look at, what the Boers have been able to accomplish, right? And obviously they're a more tightly defined group than, shall we say, heritage Americans, right? But there is something to be said for the fact that, the type of solidarity we saw, that Asabaya we saw in previous generations of our own culture, it was there for a reason, right? And it was necessary for survival. And so there's a level to which it's not, at least currently, right? Like you can technically survive without having a good relationship with your parents. You can technically be the bug man in a pod. I'm not saying you should, but it is a material possibility. When that becomes less possible, right? When all of a sudden it's like, oh, you have intermittent power, so your Steam Deck doesn't work. You may not have great internet all the time, so no Rule 34. There is a level to which it's kind of like you will be forced to live in a way that is more in line with reality. And again, right, going back to, kind of that Old Testament stories again and again, right? Like when do the people of Israel repent? Well, essentially it's when a tribe comes over the hill, and it enslaves them, puts them in bondage. And obviously I'm not looking forward to that. I don't, want to be
same.
in that
No, I
situation.
don't want to have that happen either.
But, there is a certain level where it's like, okay, like maybe there's probably a certain number of people who won't stop being Bugman until they're physically incapable of it, and maybe that's the equivalent of, quitting heroin cold turkey, but it may be better than nothing.
Well, they physically removed, as Hans Herma Hoppe would say. And right. I feel like that, that's something to consider in these discussions, just maybe physical removal wouldn't be a half bad policy on that respective Buckman. And clearly, as Gavin Newsom shows us, it can be done. It's just no one has the political will in our current state of affairs. Like, honest to God, if Governor Greg Abbott of Texas just like rolled outside of the governor's mansion and just said, listen, starting today at 6 p.m. Eastern, if there is a homeless camp, I will be deploying the National Guard and I will like force you into, like a refugee center or a stadium that we don't use. And I will use taxpayer dollars to like get them off the street and to make places safe again. All of a sudden we have our own version of, some kind of, wheelchair Caesar in Texas. And it's like, all right, finally, the cowboy's ready to go. And that would be great. But no one seems to have the desire to have that. They're willing to just play ball and let things coast down along the gradient until things get worse. And of course, that is very true. Lego Shadow Spartan, they love bondage. We have the kinkiest and disgusting form of sex pests as elites as possible. But I will say this: our politicians were less war hungry when Jeffrey Epstein was still alive.
This is the most like the worst like Jonathan Swift essay ever, in defense of Epstein.
A modest proposal in defense of Jeffrey Epstein, written by Jonathan James Epstein Swift. It'd be,
Well, that would be a really horrible like a Benthamite calculation.
No, okay. So isn't there like a science fiction story where the aliens come to Earth and the aliens are like, listen, we can give you cures and advance your technology and like give you world peace, but we need like 5 million people for slaves. I'm pretty sure this is a story, right? And I'm just imagining that like, the aliens come down and they're just like, listen, we can advance your technology, we can do everything that you need that needs to be done, but we need Jeffrey Epstein. And they're like, oh, we killed him. He killed
Can the
himself.
elites have a little bit of adrenochrome just as a treat?
Just a little adrenochrome as a treat. I don't endorse this at all. This is just me being facetious and humorous. But there is someone could make that Jonathan Swift-esque essay. I know the man just to do it. But yeah, it's all terribly screwed up in this world, isn't it?
So, Boss Grand, for $20, what are your two gut feeling? Sorry, I read that wrong. I have dyslexia. What are your two gut feeling percentages of us actually getting into World War III? My thought on that is pretty low. It seems to me that the Muslim world has calmed down. Erdogan, for whatever reason, seems to be kind of speaking in an inflammatory way. I'll put it that way. But I mean, the idea that a NATO country would go to war with Israel to me, that seems inconceivable. I rate the chances at low. The Prudentialist probably actually knows what he's talking about, but that is my gut feeling. What's your thought?
Never rule out the option. But at the current moment, I think World War III is, we'll say 80 against 24. So you got good odds. Those are pretty good odds. And so, the Not Happening gang's got a pretty good track record. However, what I would argue is that if it's going to kick off, it's not going to kick off where you think it's going to kick off. It's not going to kick off in Taiwan. And it's probably not going to kick off in Ukraine. It's going to kick off in Syria. That's where we've been bombing. That's where our troops are at. And that's where a bunch of carrier groups would love to plant a bunch of missiles in. And also, all it would take is a bunch of random missiles from Yemen to go hit an American air base or something in Syria, and then shit hits the fan. Or my favorite wild card scenario is in South America. But again...
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Because, South America is traditionally a massive basket case anyway. But I know that there's been a ton of both Russian and Chinese investment into South America.
Yes.
You already have countries like Peru. Did they do a full coup or just a fake coup? I can't remember. That's an interesting idea. I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, Chinese investment alone had pressured Uruguay to basically renounce their recognition of Taiwan as an independent state. And Chinese invest in CELAC. There's the Lithium Triangle. They're kind of testing the waters about the Monroe Doctrine. So I would say if World War III kicks off, it's going to be in an unexpected place.
Well, and that's interesting too, because there's been whisperings in the background of increased drone attacks on U.S. servicemen throughout the Middle East. And that doesn't need to be literally true to matter. I'll put it that way. Maybe enough said there. Homerus Lupercal, War Master of the Evergreen Terrace, says Spider-Man I asked for pictures of children. J. Jonah Jepstein. Scotchy, that's the
I asked
dumbest
you for
thing I've
pictures
ever
of
read.
children, not Spider-Man.
You know, it'd be great.
Yeah.
God bless.
Sorry. I very rarely just absolutely
I've been
lose it.
workshopping that joke in like 4 GCs, and I was like really excited to use it. So yeah, you heard it here first, folks. The world was a safer place when Jeffrey Epstein was alive.
One of the other things
I don't endorse this, by the way. Child trafficking is an evil, heinous crime, and whoever killed Epstein, as evil as the killer may have been, did the world a favor. Actually, they didn't do the world a favor because the trafficking is still happening, and there are allegations that he never really died. But, you know, there's an island out there that's suspiciously shaped like a certain kind of temple in the Middle East, so who knows?
I'll put it this way. Here at the Jay Burden Show, we maintain a strong anti-child trafficking stance. We do not support that. It is bad and wrong. Always out there for the strong moral takes.
But absolutely. I mean, I'm against child trafficking as well. I don't think gay people should adopt children.
Number one, Dave Rubin hater. One of the things that's been, I guess, also interesting in regards to the World War III question is that it does at least seem like, or do you want to call it the military industrial complex, whatever that industry is sort of ramping up for something. And obviously it's hard to tell how much of this is just scaremongering in the news, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'll put it this way. I, on my personal social media accounts, have started to get essentially military propaganda, showing me, videos of, white guys in crew cuts, jumping out of airplanes and all that. I don't know who, but my phone number has somehow been given to military recruiters. And so every once in a while I get a text that's like, hi, I'm, Sergeant Johnson. Do you want 30 grand to join the military? And I mean, look, as someone who's done sales, I know the math on cold calling. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so if they're that desperate, right, either you could just say like, oh, like they want the army to constantly stay at a certain rate so that budgets can increase, right? The normal kind of like business of war stuff. But on the other hand, it's like, I don't know, it seems like they are worried about their numbers, if nothing else.
Seems like you're a little desperate. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I see bruh moment in chat saying the same thing.
Yeah. You're not the only one. And it's just entertaining. Like I had the Navy reach out to me, and I had the polite response because they found my like personal email, and I was like, I don't know how the Navy found my email, but it's like, hi, I'm Petty Officer so and so, blah blah blah. Are you interested in joining the Navy? And there's all the opportunities, and just had the polite opportunity to tell them that I'm 4F. And that even if I wasn't, I had no desire to die for Israel, and I left it at that. Never got a reply. It was like the time I got an email or a text message from like the Biden campaign, and I told them in a few short words to never text this number again, you F slur, and they're like, got it, taking you off the list right away.
My favorite
You gotta tell these these B2B types, what's coming to them.
My favorite one, and this is admittedly like the social equivalent of a suicide vest, is just to go like, yeah, I'm a violent sex offender. Please give me an automatic weapon. And that's like, normally you don't get responses after that. Oh, you are just sending me the worst things possible. What if we kissed in Epstein's private Caribbean synagogue? Luthemplar, if I didn't know you were so smart, I would genuinely worry about you. Yeah, I think that bigger picture, right, going back to kind of the conversation about the American conservative movement, is how thoroughly the state has alienated the traditional base of like the traditional warrior caste in America. And like I've said before, I've been kind of off and on listening to these, kind of veterans podcasts because they're mostly apolitical, and like every guy of a certain persuasion is like, yeah, I like hearing stories about like guys doing sneaky squirrel stuff in Vietnam. But the question comes up like all the time, like, would you send your son, would you send your grandson to join? And 9 times out of 10, really since 2020, about that date. It's no, no, no. And obviously, we've mentioned the kind of like increasing, racial polarization of US politics, but like, I can't help but think that that plays a part in it, right? The idea that, there is no role for a white man in progressive politics extends to the military. And I think that, again, that goes back to, their inability to produce a kind of, dialectical synthesis between the kind of like the woke and previous America. And look, like, you mentioned, Prude, that we're kind of at a transition point between, national religions, so to speak, that maybe, Lee was a symbol of a previous order in America. And I guess I have yet to see a way in which they can kind of keep their devotion to, the progressive idols and still get people to sign up to get blown up.
Well, I mean, there's always that, idea that, oh, whatever's being sold to me isn't what it is, or, oh, I need a marketable skill, or, oh, college is expensive. Like there's a myriad of reasons that people still do it. And there are, of course, warrior families that do these things. So it's more complicated than that. I don't think people are just, you can joke and say, hey, I'm not dying for so and so, but there are tangible benefits to service, and I feel like anyone who has served in chat or in the comment section will obviously identify that very clearly. But I'm sure they would be also very quick to tell you it's not the same armed forces that they were in, so probably don't join.
No, definitely. I guess in all of this, the big question, kind of tying, all these kind of disparate points together, is essentially like, can they stick the landing? Can they produce a political solution that brings the kind of like disparate factions in American politics together? And the delicious irony in, the messaging of, the Biden regime is that, the idea that the adults are back in the room, the idea that, this is a government of unity. I mean, it effectively just kind of seems like a impossible task at this point. And, Biden's done really an incredible job of kind of making that harder and harder. And so I guess the point is, like, are we ever going to be a unified polity again? Or is this just kind of a, like the new battle lines for the foreseeable future?
I do not know where things. I don't know if you'll ever have a unified polity again, because the simple fact of the matter is that at one point in time there was a predominantly sort of white, ethnically European civic national polity that really kind of existed post World War II and during the early 20th century. That's gone, and I don't see that coming back. And so, I do see more of the subcontinental population angling for more positions in the GOP. And I do see that the Hispanic issue is going to be more prominent along the border states. I mean, the whole right wing concern over the Aztlán plan, right, to take back what was formerly Mexico. They're doing that demographically. So they're winning on that front. And they're still going to play a very popular role when it comes to dealing with the cartels and Central and South American governments. Unless you massively deport or by other means, I don't see a polity coming back. And even if it did, right, that would mean that the beige National Geographic, future America was going to have is coming, and that's just as bad because that's not America anymore. It's the same concern that Kierkegaard had in criticizing the public square and the liberal idea of the public square is that, oh, it can change 8 ways to Sunday, but it's still called the public square, even though it's not originally what it was before. In the same way that America can be, zogged out, browned out, and incompetent, but people would still call it America when that's clearly not America anymore. And I don't see us having a unified polity really on anything, lest asteroids or aliens comes. And even then, right, it would be who gets saved.
So we do have a John Carter. John Carter, I think that you and I have this relationship, Prude, where
Oh yeah.
this one particular super chatter just is determined to create chaos. And he sent me a video file that I cannot play. I know what the joke is. John Carter always sends the super chat you can't read, but I definitely can't play that video. But guess what? Thanks for the $5.
What's the video of?
Oh, I'll send it to you later. I don't even know if I can describe it on air.
Oh, well, just send it to me right now.
Right.
I'm excited. Yeah,
So,
well, I guess that's better than the usual FMKs that he sends my way on the digital archipelago, because that's just very much against my sort of I guess brand, I suppose. Oh, I see, it's been forwarded.
and then Humaris Lupercal, aka Scrotchy, said, "Don't join the Navy. It's real gay." And then John, we know the question is the Navy more or less gay since Scrotchy retired? Which, you know what, is an open question.
Those are important questions. Yeah. Oh my
right.
gosh! I just saw the.
No, you don't. Sorry, I realize this is probably miserable podcasting. To have two
Anyways,
people talk about a video, but
the video is called Epstein Sandals, like the resorts, sandals. That's so bad. That's so, so fucked up. It's worse than my joke.
Yeah, really, right? So we're kind of through that hour, Prude, and I'm running out of time. But if people want to find you, what's a good way for them to check out your work?
Oh, they can find myfriends.net/the Prudentialist. But go check out my series on Stalin's War. The first 2 chapters are already out for the general viewership. You can see the next 3 or 4 parts up on my Subscribestar, Substack, or YouTube channel memberships. I put out a little short impromptu kind of prepared talk yesterday called The Idolatrous Age. Quite happy with that. Go ahead and check that out. And then I'm probably gonna have a video out tomorrow, and it's gonna be a little more meta on sort of being a personality and our methods of communication and how that affects political discourse. And that'll be called A Long Road to a Mirror. So that'll be out tomorrow sometime in the afternoon. And then I'm recording a whole bunch of stuff with T.R. Hudson. We're going to be talking about Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. I'm talking about Joe Sobran with this philosophy YouTube channel. So pray for me on that, because I don't know how much of the spicier sides of Joe Sobran I want to talk about with this normie Asian lib guy. But all the best. And as always, Mr. Burden, it's fun to do these things and to make these jokes and to have a good time when no one has a script or anything planned out.
Oh, definitely. I think that the reason I enjoy just kind of talking to you from time to time is that the chemistry is good enough that we almost don't need a topic. It's fun to catch up, and obviously, we're separated by enough distance that it's difficult to do, IRL. But yeah, I appreciate this, and I will say the stream you did yesterday, I listened to it while I was working, and I enjoyed it enough to give it a second listen. It was well worth your time. So check that out. Everything's linked in the description. If you guys want to support my show, really the best way to do that is just spread it around. I am pretty heavily deboosted, as you can probably guess. So just post it to someone who might like to watch it. Other than that, you can check out my sponsor, Axios, Remote Fitness and Coaching. JD's a solid guy. He could use your business. I'm a customer and was even before he sponsored me. So that's a pretty hefty endorsement for me. And again, Prude, thanks so much for coming out, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. And everyone at home, remember, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.